name is Amna Jarani. Today we will be trying to shed some light on the situation in Syria. The revolution in Syria began on March the 11th, 2011 and continues until today. To help us understand this very complicated situation, I have with me today Ibtihal Bsis, who is very well acquainted with the fast-moving events in the region and has written on what's happening there to try to raise awareness of the deepening crisis in Syria. Ibtihal is a barrister by profession and has strong links to Syria, being married to a Syrian. She has frequently visited the area, in fact every year since 2004, and so has many eyewitness accounts to share with us today and to substantiate her view. Ibtihal has produced a documentary on Syria entitled The Story of Syria. Ibtihal is a mother of 4 and the women's media representative for Hizb ut-Tahrir in Britain. Assalamu alaikum, Ibtihal.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you for joining me today. When did you last visit Syria?
I have just returned as of September 2014. I spent some time in Syria this time.
Okay, and how was your visit this time?
Unfortunately, I have to say that it was the situation of the people was far worse. I've seen that people have started to build homes at the border, which are effectively on a mountain that has no vegetation.
Is that in the current sort of what we know as refugee camps?
Yes, that's right.
So trying to make them into a more permanent dwelling?
Effectively, that's what's happening, and they've expanded it even in beyond what we understood to be the refugee camp. They're actually getting, they're triple the size now, and they still don't have enough room for the people that are coming into these refugee camps.
And how are the conditions in the refugee camps? How are things like electricity and heating and water?
There is no heating, there is no electricity. People would be fortunate to get a proper meal every 3 days, maybe. It is dire.
Despite the masses of charity that is being sent there continuously?
That's very interesting that you raise that, because there's a lot of questions about whether this charity is actually reaching the people that it needs to reach. Unless the charity comes in itself and hand delivers, and I understand a lot of them do try, the goods to the people, they will often not reach the people at all. So it's very concerning. I do know that a lot of the charities do try, but now they're being hampered at the border, not just by customs, but they're being stopped by terrorism personnel as well.
I'm sure with the winter incumbent, the conditions are only going to get worse as the weeks go by.
Much worse.
One of the latest developments in Syria, and something not so often reported in the mainstream media, is how America has stepped up her military strikes in the region, not just Syria but over Iraq as well. What's your view of this situation?
Well, Obama has specifically said that they would need 3 years in order to remove ISIS. They have said that they're there mainly, or not completely exclusively, to eradicate ISIS. And his words were actually echoed by John Kerry, who said that, and I quote him, it may take a year, it may take 2 years, it may take 3 years. We also know that 60 states have signed up to the removal of ISIS, in effect supporting the American foreign policy under the Paris conference. And it begs the question, does it not, that if ISIS is a small violent group and their goal is to remove this group, why would it need 3 years and why would it need 60 states? They removed Saddam Hussein, Amina, in less than a month. And he had a state and he had a military that would dwarf ISIS battalion, the ISIS battalion. So is this really about ISIS, or is it really about what John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesperson, said, which is in order to remove ISIS you need to remove their ideology? Is it more about removing an ideological belief that these people carry in the region? This is really the question that we have to ask.
You raised some interesting points there, and we'll be coming back to this issue of what really is going on in the region. But coming back to the Assad regime, which is why the revolution started in the first place, where the people wanted oust him, as other Arab peoples have done in their own countries. Sure, America has taken a supportive stance in this, in condemning Assad's actions on his own people, by sending people to check his chemical weapons stash and effectively reining it in, have helped to police and monitor what he is doing to his own people. How do you view this in terms of facilitating and helping the cause of the Syrian people?
It's not at all helping the cause of the people. I would say it was the opposite of that. When we had the chemical weapons being used in Ghouta, and I was in Syria at the time that it was being used, it caused a lot of devastation. Obama said that this was a red line. He then went on to redraw that red line twice. When he was using conventional means, such as killing his people by the use of tanks, missiles, military equipment that was so sophisticated, the battalions had nothing to match it, or anywhere near anything that could match that kind of military sophistication. And this had gone on from 2011 until the summer of 2012. For a year and a half he was killing these people by those means. America did nothing. They did nothing. But when he uses chemical warfare, suddenly there's a red line. And it's tantamount to this, isn't it, Amina? Removing the chemical weapons is effectively removing the weapon that the perpetrator had used to carry out his crime, but not remove the criminal. This doesn't make sense. He still continues, incidentally, to kill his people. And at that time, when I was there in Syria, it was reported that he'd killed 150,000 of his people, and they were doing nothing. Incidentally, the State Department, the American State Department, has removed the funding, which was around $500,000, to investigate whether Bashar al-Assad had committed war crimes. So that tells you that in fact what is actually happening is they are reinforcing his presidency. They're giving him the license to kill his people. The New York Times in October reported that America is now in a position where it is fighting alongside the Shia from Iran and Assad's regime against the people in Syria. That tells us that America is not looking to rein in or remove Bashar al-Assad. It's doing the opposite of that.
That's rather shocking what you say. How could you say this when we see that America is bombing ISIS, both in Syria and in Iraq? Their attack is on ISIS.
Well, I can substantiate my statement by actually two personnel of the US administration. One of them is Chuck Hagel, who on the 30th of October told the Washington Times that the military strikes, Bashar al-Assad, and I use his word, derives some benefit from these military strikes. Also the American ambassador, the former American ambassador for Syria, Robert Ford, resigned in February before the military strikes of America, and he basically, his interview was tantamount to, or amounted to, America's foreign policy means that they have given Bashar al-Assad a license to kill his people, which means they have effectively done nothing. This isn't about ISIS. As you know, as you've told your viewers, I was in the region, I was there. And I spoke to people afterwards. My husband contacted people. We have family there. We're in contact with people. When America made its first military strike, it made it in Kafr Daghlian. I know this area, Kafr Daghlian. It's in Idlib. There is not a single member of ISIS in this area. ISIS have no control of this area in any shape, in any way that can be fathomed. This area, in fact, was struck, and civilian refugees were killed from the well-known family of Jasha. And they also killed an area, incidentally, last Thursday that I had visited during the revolution, that was Harim. Again, the people on the ground say there is no ISIS here. America has admitted they have struck these areas and there is no ISIS personnel there. But they say that there is a group called Khorasan. When you ask the people on the ground, they will say to you, we've never heard of such a group. This is something new to us. And even America have said that this is a group that has been operating there and it's part of Al-Qaeda. But when I read a headline of an article recently, on the 14th of November 2014, it read, America continues to bomb the mysterious Khorasan terrorist group. The word mysterious says a lot. Now, the only people that seem to know anything about this group is the military intelligence, the American military intelligence. And what is even more concerning is they can roll out these names and be totally unaccountable, and they do not feel they have to verify their information.
Well, of course, no one's going to be able to question whether this group that you mentioned, Khorasan, exists or not, unless you're actually from the area. That's obviously going to be something which, you know, for us watching the situation from a distance, it's very difficult for us to even question it. So
that's why it's very important to get this. You don't see this in the mainstream media.
Okay, rather interesting, I should say, at least. Your claim that the US's stance is not about ISIS. Well, first of all, I find that strange because it seems to be continuously about ISIS in all of the headlines. If you are saying that it's not against ISIS, how do you explain the current stance of the continual attack on ISIS? And if you say it's not about ISIS, what is it about?
It goes back to the divide and rule policy that was started at the demise of the Islamic State, the true Islamic State, the Khilafah, in 1924. We had the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and
the
secret Sykes-Picot Agreement, which no longer became secret after 1924, when Britain and France effectively carved up the whole of the Muslim lands that the Khilafah ruled between themselves. We will all have heard of the new Middle East map, which came with the neocons, and we know that the Vice President Joe Biden completely supports this new Middle East map. It is not about removing borders, it's actually about putting in more borders. So what they effectively want to do is they want to split or divide Iraq, and this plan was actually moving or progressing during the Bush administration, but didn't come to fruition.
Okay, what would be gained by splitting Iraq into these, you know, more divided and smaller regions?
If you divide the people, it would enable you to rule them better. It would enable you to cause more division amongst them. Effectively, what they want to do in Iraq, and there was no.
But how would that be a plan that the American administration would want? Surely they would prefer stability to enable trade to continue in that area.
This actually does not facilitate their interests. We have to remember that the Middle East has the resources that the rest of the world depends on, such as diamonds, cotton, gold, oil, crude oil. In Iraq, there is an area in which it produces crude oil from the ground and it doesn't need filtration, and you don't even need to dig for it. It comes out of the land easily. Again, Syria is about a strategic position. Remember, it's on the border with Israel. So this is a very important part of the world to maintain America's interests. Now, America's interests will not be met by a revolution which calls for something other than America wants it to call for.
Okay, so if this is about a very important strategic location, it's about geography, why the front of ISIS? Why is ISIS the one being put as the main reason for the fight going on there?
Because it's a convenient bogeyman to allow them to come into the region. They haven't been able to come in until ISIS began to emerge conveniently around 2013, some would say conveniently. So it gives them the justification to come in and say we are destroying a violent group. But remember that it should really take the F-22s, which cause more devastation, less than a week to contain and eradicate a group like ISIS. This isn't really about ISIS, it's about maintaining their control over the region. That's what it's about.
Stepping away from this whole sort of remapping of the region and coming back to the fact that this region has drawn many Muslims from around the world. okay, to come and fight there, and the whole radicalisation process, which concerns so many people. We've seen this already starting to spill over. We've seen the slight effects of this here and there in acts that people know go against the teachings of Islam, whether it's the Madrid bombings, whether it's 9/11 itself or 7/7, and other examples where we've seen the jihadist mindset coming over into Europe. Surely America and her allies would be justified in trying to curtail that, because as most people will say, this has got nothing to do with Islam. So surely this action is justified to stop that overspill coming over into Europe and to the other countries.
Is American foreign policy actually doing away with these so-called terror attacks, or is it fueling them and bringing them about? Remember, the attacks of 7/7 or 9/11 didn't happen in a political vacuum, they happened in a political context. Incidentally, there's no evidence at all that people are going to Syria and coming back, radicalised and blowing up buildings in Britain or in America. There's no evidence.
But isn't that surely because those plans have been thwarted and stopped?
Remember that the military strikes have started now. They didn't begin in 2011, and we've had what may look like to a lot of people, the international community effectively doing nothing between 2011 to 2014, and there was no evidence of people going along and radicalising themselves and then coming back and blowing up buildings. This is an astonishing statement to make. What people may be more concerned about is the foreign policy of the US and killing innocent civilians, and if they are concerned about tyranny and ensuring that there is world peace, that they are the peacekeepers, although a lot of people say we don't license them to be, and they police this world, then why didn't they do anything about Bashar al-Assad? He has now killed 300,000 of his people. He has. Why didn't they move when he killed the French journalist?
That is an astounding number.
Yes, it is. And they say around 6 million have become refugees in Syria. I put the figure at much higher than that from what I saw on the ground, and a lot of people do. Why didn't they move when they killed the American journalist recently? Why didn't they even move when Dr. Abbas Khan?
Why didn't they? What's your
Well, this is why. They only moved when a relatively small terrorist group, even Bashar al-Assad's military, dwarf ISIS.
They're small but rather potent, aren't they, in the sorts of horrific things which they have done?
Well, I don't know who's more potent. When you compare how many people they've killed to the 300,000 that Bashar al-Assad has killed, it does even come into the 0.01 or 2%. They're not making those sorts of comparisons.
But it's that thinking, and that's the ideology that's being referred to, though, isn't it? That sort of murderous, bloodthirsty, beheading type thing that we keep seeing again and again.
Which is exactly
whippings, open, lashings and stonings that are happening in the regions controlled by ISIS. We should not fall victim to the media propaganda that is being given to us. Of course, those kind of attacks and killings are atrocious, but Bashar al-Assad has been doing far worse for far longer than ISIS. Remember, ISIS only came in on the ground in 2013. Bashar al-Assad has been there for 40 years, and he has been killing his people behind closed doors, in smoke-filled rooms, and not once has anyone spoken out against removing this tyrant. Not once have they sent one single rocket in order to remove Bashar al-Assad. What happened when these 300,000 people have been killed? Not a single state moved, or even a no-fly zone, and the people on the ground did call the international community, and all they sent was a peacekeeping team with their notebooks and pens, who in the end left in their UN 4x4s and did nothing. Effectively, this is much more than what it is being portrayed to be. As I said previously, it would take you a week, surely, America to remove
to remove ISIS, but they're talking about an ideology, and they are punishing the people. That's why they are killing civilians in particular regions, because in these particular regions people are calling for Islam. And we have to remember that even Obama gave up in 2012 saying that people are calling for freedom and democracy, and that's when we heard the language of moderate battalions and Islamist battalions and extremist battalions. Remember, this language is even happening here on the ground. We are being told that if we believe in certain ideas, if we believe that we are part of one ummah, then we are extremists. This is what these military strikes are about. They're about punishing the people for not accepting the alternatives that they presented to them via the Syrian National Council, which was seen as a moderate American user-friendly organization that people said no, and the Syrian coalition that again people said no, and these were all American-backed. We know that. We know that. We saw John Kerry have meetings with them all the time. So effectively, these military strikes, what I'm saying in a sentence, is about Islam and removing the call for Islam.
You mentioned a very poignant word there, ummah, a word which Muslims around the world understand to mean the oneness of brotherhood between Muslims. And based upon that very idea, we know that Syria has pulled at the heartstrings of Muslims globally. And indeed it's pulled at the heartstrings of anyone of any faith, because the humanitarian crisis that has erupted from this uprising over the last 3 years is truly unbearable to watch for anyone who has an ounce of humanity in them. For those Muslims watching, what would be your message to especially the youth who we hear are travelling out there to go and offer their material support to the fight against Assad and now against the increasing US strikes? What would be your message to those individuals who just can't bear it and feel the need to go out there themselves?
It's understandable, isn't it, when you see the devastation unravel before your eyes, when you see and you hear that children have been dismembered, when you see that newborn babies are being, they're having their eyes gouged out or they're being thrown around like a football. When you see that what you consider women who are your sisters to be violated, to think that, well, to look around and see that the international community has done nothing, and to then make a decision that you want to go out and help. But we have lessons that we can learn from places such as Palestine, Gaza, Palestine, where for 66 years individuals have gone out to try and help the situation, to become militarily involved, and it hasn't made any difference. If anything, the situation has got worse. What we need is an army against an army. That's justice.
Okay, so when you say an army, are you calling for those Muslims who are travelling around the world to become one army and then to go and help in that way?
We have a number of established armies. Some of them are in Turkey, we have in Jordan, we have in Pakistan. The people in Al-Quds were calling for the Pakistani army to come and rescue them. I was told by the people in Syria when I crossed the border in 2013 that if the army, the small army barracks in Rayhalla was to come and cross the border, that Bashar al-Assad would be finished in less than a day.
So when you talk about the armies, you're talking about those personnel who work in the already existing armies.
Yes.
Under the current Muslim countries that we see already. So it's not to those individuals to come and form a new army. Right.
People are understandably aggrieved. It's a horrible situation. But we need to channel our energy into contacting the personnel in the armies, generals, colonels, and there's some headway being made on that. We hear that some generals were arrested in Pakistan, for example, for being sympathetic to the idea of having a khilaf, an Islamic state. We know that these people are our brothers, our uncles, our fathers. When I travelled to Pakistan, by example, I met many families, and a number of them had family who were military personnel, we can easily contact these people. And we know that this is the only thing that realistically makes sense, because Bashar al-Assad has his military, we have Iran who sends people to fight, and we have America with its F-22s. How can individuals face the might of these armies? We need an army that can stand up to another army with their military might, with their military equipment, with their know-how, with their training. This is what we need, and a lot of them are lying idle on the borders. And I have to say, many of them are very aggrieved about what's happening to Syria, but they are being stopped from crossing the border. I saw it for myself when I saw personnel looking and shaking their heads at the situation of the Syrians. You can see that they're very upset, because it's a very natural feeling, it's an emotional feeling for us to feel a part of the Muslim nation. But we have to reach out to these personnel and tell them to come and rescue the devastation that is happening, to stop it.
You mentioned the term Khilafah or Caliphate as it is more widely known. Can you suggest a more realistic solution for the region, for both Syria and Iraq? Because we've seen how ISIS, through their so-called establishment of the Caliphate, we've seen how it's failed and is failing, continues to fail miserably. We've seen the violence, the aggression that's come out of it, the open beheadings, the stonings, the lashings, the beheadings of foreign journalists as well. Can you think of a more, maybe modern or up-to-date solution that would be applicable to put an end to the convoluted situation that we see out there?
ISIS does not represent the Khilafah. They are not even a state. They are a group like any other battalion. They may be one of the stronger battalions, but they do not have a state. Even the president of France, Hollande, referred to them in his opening speech at the Paris conference as a terrorist movement. And they are, by no means, they do not have a military, they do not have systems in place, they live in a state of insecurity, they can't even protect their borders. They don't have borders, incidentally, because they change during the conflict of Syria, so they do not represent the ruling system of Islam.
So what do you mean they don't have a military? All we see is the military side of ISIS and their constant expansion.
But they are like any other battalion. They are all fighting in the revolution. They do not have systems in place, an education system, a ruling system, an economic system. They aren't even able to have a state. What they have is an area that they control within a state, and that is the state of Syria as it stands now. What we need is what the people are calling for. I can't suggest something, and the solution must come from the people. And as I say, that's why they're being punished, because they are calling for the Islamic Khilafah. As someone who works with Hizb ut-Tahrir, we have been working for the Islamic Khilafah for the last 60 years, and we continue to work today in Syria and all over the Muslim world for that Khilafah. The Khilafah has had a lot of propaganda said against it by Obama and other Western rulers. It is the only system that worked for Muslims and non-Muslims alike. We can even see the remnants of it in Syria, where we had Christians living amongst Muslims. I remember in Aleppo, the area that I used to visit regularly, in one area there used to be 4 churches which were surrounding one mosque, and people lived very happily. Well, that was the remnants of the Khilafah that ruled there. In fact, Damascus was the capital of the Khilafah for centuries under the Umayyads. So we have to remember that this is the Khilafah that will elect their ruler. This is the Khilafah that will bring justice to the people. Muslims and non-Muslims alike, they will treat citizens equally. This is the Khilafah that will ensure that education is given to everybody, that the ruler is somebody that is elected and accountable to the people. And when people account their ruler, they will not be punished, they will not be killed, they will not be tortured. And in fact, this is something that the Khalifa will ensure happens, that the people are able to account him. This is the Khilafah that we hear about was the Golden Age. This is the only civilization that lasts for more than 1,000 years. And I am astonished I have to tell you, Amina, I am astonished when people are surprised that people want Islam to come back and rule them. We are Muslims. We have a whole civilization that dates back from Medina until 1924. We have a history. Khalid bin Walid opened up Syria. In fact, he is buried in Homs, although his grave is now desecrated. But this whole area was of interest to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said many hadiths about it. Why would it surprise people to know that people want to live according to their beliefs and to the civilization that ruled them before, happily? And I say again, Muslims and non-Muslims alike.
Okay, I mean, it certainly sounds like a very peaceful and idyllic situation, and I do hope that the peace comes to that area as quickly as possible. In the meantime, what's your message to those Muslims watching all over the world? Not those very few jihadists. We've talked about the solution. It shouldn't come from those individuals who want to go and fight. Indeed, that's not going to achieve any fruit. But for the rest of the Muslim community watching, what's your message to them?
I think for the Muslim and even the non-Muslim communities that continue to watch the news as it unfolds, and it's all about ISIS and the land that ISIS has taken control of and the barbary that goes on, and somehow we have forgotten. And I want to remind the viewers that don't forget that these people continue to die. These children continue to lose their childhood. I'll give you a couple of things I saw when I was there. When I came back from Syria, I crossed, and I think it was before we crossed the border, they asked us to go into a makeshift room. When I went in, the stench hit me straight away, and I saw some children, about 5 children, who were between the ages of 4 and 10 at the most. I had never seen children eat soil. That was the first time I actually saw children eat soil. They were drinking black coffee that had been left by people who were standing at the border. Their skin was burnt, so that you would think that that was the skin of a 60-year-old, not a 4-year-old child. And
because they have no shelter, or is it from the start?
There is no shelter. The weather conditions, remember I was there at the end of August, were very, very severe. And people had built homes on a mountain on the border of Syria. There were men there that couldn't walk, husbands that were devastated, women who recognised that we were strange to the land and asked us, begged my husband for help in order to cross the border into Turkey, thinking that they would be able to help their families back home. One woman I'd spoken to said that a rocket had hit her home. They were a very affluent family, but her life had been destroyed in a moment when a missile hit her home. Her husband, she said, I don't recognise anymore, we've lost everything. Her children no longer go to school. One of her child had a limb missing, one of his right leg had been missing. Let's not forget, in the midst of all of this propaganda being peddled out by the US administration and the 60 coalition states at the Paris conference, there are people, there are human beings that are dying every day, and let us not forget them.
Ibtihal Bsis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For sharing your heart-wrenching accounts with us and for shedding some light on what's going on in the continuing situation in Syria.